Good morning, Kennesaw Happenings. We have a special guest in the studio, well, kind of in the podcast. Savannah Rose, if you haven't listened to a previous podcast, we met each other a couple years back when she hosted a podcast for an organization she was helping and supporting. And so, fast forward bunch of years, we reconnect, and I absolutely love her mindset. And so I wanted her to come on to really share three things with our viewers from a therapist, the eyes of somebody that works with people every day. I want just to kind of have a dialogue about that. So Savannah, for the people that don't know you, would you tell us who you are, what you do, and who you serve?
Of course, yes. Hello, everyone. Good morning or afternoon, whenever you're tuning in. I'm Savannah Rose Johnson. Thank you so much for having me, Pete. It's just
Absolutely.
such a pleasure to know you, to work with you. Thanks for inviting me. And for those of y'all who I haven't met yet, so I am a life coach primarily, but I'm also just in the holistic wellness field. So I also do a handful of other things as far as wellness is concerned. So whether it's Reiki or whether it's ketamine integration or hypnosis, there's a whole kind of world that we're just now really tapping into. And I'm very grateful to be in this field and helping kind of pioneer a lot of things. And so I would say probably my core population that I work with would be women, but I do have some males that I work with, but I just really love working with women. And I would say of all ages, probably young adult up. And I would say anyone who is um, needing some help with like trauma recovery, but more so in that realm of just trying to find themselves again, whether it's like finding themselves after a loss or after a grief process or during a grief process or a life transition, just really learning who they are and connecting to themselves and their personal power, and then allowing us to work together to connect with their purpose and their next steps from that point forward, operating from that authentic place. So that's me in a nutshell for you.
Wow, that's a big nutshell. I like it because it's so pertinent to today's world.
Mm-hmm.
We are in a kind of a crazy time of you're either on one side or the other. There's nothing in between. People aren't communicating.
Yeah.
They're being reinforced by their belief system, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say? I like what you said, the trauma part.
Mm-hmm.
What have you seen? Like, I want to give our viewers three tips, and I think that's one of them because you touch that area.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think trauma? How does that affect a person's mindset when you start working with people that have had that? What do you do with them to try to get them to get through that?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a good question. Well, there's different types of trauma, and I think because there's what we call like capital T or big T trauma, which is like, let's say, like a big single isolated horrible event, like a car crash or the loss of someone suddenly. Or even just like a major event in the community. Like we see some like really stuff, like sad stuff happening in our community or in other countries. So like those are capital T traumas. And those, I think we handle those a certain way because it's I wouldn't say it's less complicated, but it's a little more contained with how it shapes us. I would say it's the little T traumas that really um, have more of an impact, I would say, in sneakier ways than people really anticipate. And so, what I mean by that is like, if you have like a giant flesh wound, it's really easy to say, oh, I'm hurt. I need stitches. I need surgery. Help me heal this. Whereas when we have a paper cut or a little gash or more paper cuts, it's so easy to be like, oh, I'm fine. I'm fine. It's just a paper cut. It's normal. But if those add up over time, it can really hurt us or we can still bleed out from that. So that's kind of how I explain like the difference between the two. And I think it's kind of like those little T traumas or just a mixture of the two over time, that can really shape our perception of ourselves, of other people, our sense of safety in the world, our ability to have connections and relationships. So I would say when I work with folks in trauma recovery, one of the things I like to do is just allow them to take their power back by starting to almost like create a divide in a way of like what is actually them, like who is actually the person that they are, and then what has the trauma or the situation in their life that conditioned them to being. It's beyond the nature versus nurture, but I would say sometimes when we've experienced trauma, like an unhealthy relationship, for example,
Mhm.
sometimes we have these patterns of thinking that we don't even realize that we're thinking, and we've had to develop those patterns, and maybe we didn't even realize we were developing them in that moment. But then let's say we get out of that relationship and try to start a new one, those patterns are going to show up again because that's just the way it's been, and we may have had to adapt to thinking that way. So helping people observe, well, I mean, have you ever thought about that thought? Like, is this just something that shows up and you run with it, or is it something that you start to get curious about? And it's that observation, that curiosity piece that allows people to start to become like take a step back
Mhm.
from their brain running the show and starting to kind of cultivate like how do I want to think, and is this really true to me and what I want and what I deserve. So I guess to answer your question, Pete, it's staying curious and learning how to observe, which that I mean that takes practice. Like no one is perfect at it, but I think the more you learn how to do it and experience the power that comes with starting to just question things, and with that curiosity, not necessarily criticism, but just curiosity, it can be very powerful.
Yeah, I mean that's so accurate in what I see in my world, and I'm not obviously in your world. How you see it from a different set of eyes than I do, but I see it being played out because later in life, living in a facility that the average age is 80, people get to a stage in their life that they're more self-reflecting, but they're still busy with their thoughts. And I think today is it, you have that digital phone that keeps us from thinking. It's like we don't look for directions like we used to, thinking through what we have to do. We just hit a button, GPS takes us there. So
Mhm.
we relax our brains so much, we
Mhm.
don't think like we used to
Mhm.
years ago. What would you say, like when you run in? So you've described like short term trauma.
Mhm.
What would you say? Because I was at an event yesterday and the person mentioned early childhood trauma.
Mhm.
Is- How do you see those different? I mean,
Mhm.
they're both trauma, but one is way a lot of years. One is a short term, like a car accident or a event in your life that happens at a person. What would you say to people that come to you with trauma from way back?
Mhm. Yeah, and I mean, and who hasn't experienced something? I think having compassion is really key when it comes to exploring stuff from our childhood, because like whether it's compassion for that little version of us, or even just compassion for our caregivers who, I mean, let's say maybe they didn't make the best decisions at times, like I've seen that, but they were doing the best that they could at that time. And I think that sometimes that can be challenging. And it's okay if that person's best wasn't what the child needed. I mean, not that it's okay, but it's, I think it's empowering for adults to look back on those times and say, hey, yeah, this need of mine wasn't met. And not that that parent or caregiver was intentionally doing it, or maybe they were, that can also be possible. But let's say maybe they weren't intentionally trying to hurt this person. At the same time, it's very empowering for that that client of mine to still acknowledge, like, yeah, maybe they were doing their best, but this need still wasn't met. So therefore, it's still a win that we're identifying that this is a need. And maybe it wasn't met then, doesn't mean it can't get met now. So I think that that's like a way that they can take their power back in the present. But when it comes down to those experiences in our childhood, it's also very important to look at brain development alongside it, because our sense of identity really doesn't start becoming built, and I guess like our individualism, like thinking like, oh, I am my own little person, that doesn't really start happening until around like 9 or 10 or so. And then it's like kicked into overdrive in our middle school years, which is one of the reasons why middle school is so hard, is because we're finally really becoming self-aware and like, what does this mean? And what is my worth? And how does it relate to other people? So thinking about fourth or fifth grade is when that starts to kick in. And so anything that happens to us before that point can be really challenging to process as an adult. That's why I love doing the psychedelic therapy with folks, because sometimes it makes that process a little easier to explore, or also like the hypnosis as well, like being able to move past the structures and beliefs and things that we build as an adult with those brain structures. Because if you think back to when we're smaller, we don't have a lot of our more complicated brain processing structures yet. It's all going to be on like a very somatic body emotional level that those memories are created and stored and experienced. So even I'm sure, Pete, you may have heard that myth of like, oh, you don't remember anything before you're 5. Yes, you do. It's just the memory is stored in like a different language, if you want to think of it that way.
Yeah.
Because we're teeny tiny, we don't have these parts of our brain yet that are like even making words that are like, this happened to me and it felt bad. Like that's like not something our brain is able to process. So we just remember it as a feeling. And then sometimes that gets stored into our body. And so we can be 30 years old and have this feeling that feels familiar, that's triggering or whatever it is. But it's so hard sometimes to place that memory or that experience, because our adult brain is trying to make it make sense in like these new structures that we have in that language, when that memory was recorded in a different like language, so to speak, like the body's language. So it's about learning how to, in the recovery process, learning how to connect the mind and body again, so you can start to speak the same language and you can process those things from way back when. So I hope that made sense.
Oh, it did, because I've never heard it explained with the different languages in the brain. Because that now that you're saying that, I have a person that had some trauma, and so we'll fast forward to over 75, closer to 80.
Mhm.
And the therapist took that person back to the childhood, and it was like reenacting that trauma and taking that person back to that small kid to address it and then change the framing of it.
Mhm.
Almost like what you just described is the languages were not talking. And
Mhm.
so it created a behavior that was not really adult healthy behavior. And
Yeah.
so many years, I mean, you're looking 60 years
Mhm.
from something that happened way back when. But
Mhm.
if we don't get the languages talking, it's like me trying to talk to you in Spanish and you don't understand Spanish. It's like,
Mhm.
how good are we going to communicate? Zippo,
Mhm.
nothing. I
Mhm.
love that. I have never heard that in my all
Mhm.
my time, and I see it here because it is a reflection. As you get, a person said that yesterday, we do more self-reflecting the older we get, because we want to make our life matter. And so
Yeah.
if at the end of our life we can say my life mattered, I mean,
Mhm.
that's kind of like a piece, like, man, that's
Mhm.
good. But if you can't say yes, there's going to be an unrest in your mind, like,
Yeah.
So that's so good. So I want you to, I want to touch on meditation
Mhm,
and and really the hypnosis part, because I think both of them affect the mindset.
mhm,
So, do you meditate? I know the answer, but I mean,
mhm.
explain to our viewers, like, how important is that to your mental health?
Mm. I yes, meditation is it's so crucial. And I would say anyone who is looking to get started in meditation, I think sometimes there's this um underlying pressure to be like perfect at it, or like what even is it, like what is it supposed to feel like, what am I supposed to do, how do I stop thinking of nothing, or how do I think of nothing. It sometimes can be kind of challenging, so I say before we get to like the pure meditation, I would say start with what I call like marination. If you think about marinating a steak, you are putting the piece of meat in some oil and vinegar and spices so that way it can soak it up and have that more robust flavor. So I would say if you compare that to like a meditation practice, doing like a guided meditation, which is like something that I do with folks, where it's like I kind of give them the spices and the vinegar and the oil, and all they have to do is really just rest their
Mhm.
body and soak up what I'm saying. And it's so normal if your mind is wanting to think of what you're going to have for dinner or reflecting on your day. That's okay. That's such a normal thing. Our minds, they love to think and they love to stay busy. But that's also something you can incorporate into your meditation or marination practice, is starting to again observe and get curious, like, and notice like, oh hey, my mind is wandering on this thing. Let's see if I can focus it, call it back to what Savannah is saying or this guided meditation is saying to me. Almost thinking about your mind as if it's like a little puppy. If it, because sometimes little puppies will just like just run away and go explore their own thing.
Yeah.
It's fine. That's just what puppies do. So it's like, okay, call your mind back to you. Be like, okay, no, we're not thinking of that or smelling that thing. It's we're gonna be right here. So just inviting that playfulness into it, I think, is how you really get more enjoyment out of it. Because I think sometimes folks get frustrated where they're like, okay, I'm not thinking of nothing. It's wrong. I'm bad at this. And I'm like, no, it does. It's not a one size fits all. And there's no perfect way of doing it either. I think just the fact that you're taking time to be still, to get off of a device, and to just start to observe your thoughts, that is more than enough. Sometimes that's what I have to do too. Or with a guided meditation, I kind of think of it as like feeding my mind more intentional thoughts. So if I'm caught up in anxiety and just can't seem to get my mind out of an anxious loop, then I'm like, okay, I gotta rest my body, and I need to listen to a guided meditation to start to feed my mind what it is I want to think. Because we do have that autonomy over our thoughts. I think sometimes we don't realize that, but observing our thoughts allows us to be more intentional, like, okay, what do I want to plug in and what do I not want to take up as much space? So less space for anxiety, more space for like prosperity thinking or peaceful thinking. Like you really can advocate for that through the meditative experience. So did that answer your question?
Like, again, each one you're knocking out of the park, and I'm just, because your analogies are real life examples. Like, I'd never have heard the puppy analogy. And being ADHD, having so many thoughts in there, I can now think of my brain as a puppy. And the
Mhm,
puppies grow up, and they
mhm,
grow up to be, and if you train the puppy right,
mhm,
it
mhm,
obviously has the good habits. If you don't train the puppy,
mhm,
puppy's going to have accidents and all those things. And I think
mhm,
that analogy of a brain being a puppy is really accurate, because today we have so much information coming
mhm,
at us. I mean,
mhm,
it's people trying to keep up with information that they won't, because it's
mhm,
doubling every whatever it is. So if you're trying to take this brain that wasn't designed for all this stimulation and you're trying to plug it into today, I think that's when you have that short circuit, like I can't handle it anymore. What would you say? Like, man, I tell you, that puppy thing is so clear in my mind now.
Good.
Because a person I use, which is Growth Day, he says he keeps using the word refresh. He said refresh. Because when I first started doing it, there was no way I couldn't do it more than 30 seconds because I had so many thoughts like coming in like ping pong balls, and it's like, it's healthy to think and to refresh, but today's society pulls us in the direction of chaos and so much information. Do you like do it several times during the day? How do you take breaks? Like you're creating some projects, you're doing some stuff. We know that we have to, I use Pomodoro, which is, those breaks, every 10-minute breaks every hour.
Yeah.
I just practice it. Not that I do it consistently, but I try. How do you refresh with your daily routine?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, I really like to in the morning. And I think you and I have talked about this on the other episode we did on your Kennesaw Happenings podcast, Pete, where it's my morning routine is like really sacred me time. And so we usually like to start my day with just that mindset shaping when it comes down to like what I do take in, whether it's like just prioritizing like my spiritual practice before I check my phone or social media or anything like that. So being intentional about what we do let in. And then when I need a refresher, that's usually probably more in like the middle of my day. So I would say after I have lunch, that's usually when I like to just sit for a bit and just allow my body to digest, but also just kind of check in with myself on like, how am I feeling? Do I need to take a little like nap, or do I need to just like rest, or what do I need to do the rest of my day? And so sometimes kind of in the middle of the day is when I found for me personally to be a sweet spot for meditation, because it allows me to just, after I've had like a morning of stimulation and activity and whatever it is, to just kind of invite balance into my day. Because if I've been doing a lot of doing, then I just need to allow myself to just be for a bit. And taking a walk is always nice too, because there's different ways that you can do meditative practices. Like again, it's not a one size fits all. So some people like to knit, and that's kind of like their meditative thing when they're doing something with their hands. Some people really just like to be still and meditate, and that's certainly fine. And then some people, like maybe they find that meditation through going on a walk and just being in nature and not having like the phone with them or listening to something, just listening to the birds and the wind and all those different things. So there's different ways to check in with your mindset, I would say. And again, like just finding the things that you are feeling that you need and honoring that. So I think sometimes if it's like too rigid of a structure, it becomes robotic and we're not remaining present. We're like, okay, it's time for me to meditate. And like, then it becomes that kind of autopilot. And I think the real purpose behind meditation isn't to just feel better so we can produce more. It's really to check in and honor ourselves. So I think thinking about the why we're doing it and what we're needing and honoring that is probably the most important thing.
Wow. You're 3 for 3 this morning. How do you do it this early in the morning? I mean, we'll get in. I want to get in at a later date, the morning routine, because, I'm a firm believer your morning creates your day.
Absolutely.
So, I'm a big fan of atomic habits, stacking habits on top of each other. And so I'd love to get into that at another time. And I promised you it would be short this morning because I know you've got a busy day. So how can people get a hold of you?
Yeah, thank you. So if you're wanting to get in touch with me or check out any of my
Yeah, just
resources,
where would they go to get more of Savannah Rose?
yes. Yeah, so my website is a good place to start. So
Okay.
my website is eclipseevolution.com. And so on there, there's my books and my podcast and articles and resources, whatnot. And then also I'm pretty active, I would say, on Instagram.
Hmm.
That's probably my most active social media platform. I'm trying to get more into Facebook, but I just I'm honestly not the biggest fan of social media. So it's like
Yeah.
I have them, but like I don't know, I can't. So Instagram is the one that I really invest in, and it's same as my website, just add the LLC. So it's Eclipse Evolution
Okay.
LLC. That's my Instagram. So that's where you can find
That's
me.
awesome. We'll put it in the show notes. I didn't have that foresight to get it all on the banner.
That's
So,
okay.
we'll put it in there because, people will be driving and we don't want them to multitask when they drive.
Mhm.
Like they're going to be like, I got to get a hold of it, Savannah. And then like they're waiting and they're driving and that doesn't always create the best experience. So I love, Crystal couldn't be here today. Thank you for being with us because I mean, these three things are just so relevant to
Mhm.
our day today. I mean,
Mhm.
the mindset is, I almost say like the mind's under attack from,
Oh my gosh, yes.
it's
Mhm.
just like, we're like,
Mhm.
oh, I got to remember this. And then, it's like, whoa, it's like short circuiting in its own little way. So,
Mhm.
what would be the one thing that you would want our viewers to take home with them from this podcast?
Mm. Oh, that's a good one. I would say, I mean, I think you kind of alluded to it, Pete, where I would say your attention is your life force. Because you're right, like the mind is under attack. Attention is currency nowadays. Like these apps are designed to hold your attention because if they
Yep.
have your
Yep.
attention, they're making sales. And so your attention, if you think about it, that's what you're pouring out onto something or someone. You're giving yourself your life. You're experiencing life through your attention and where it's going. You're giving us your attention right now by listening, taking in, processing, allowing my words to sink in and resonate. That's you're giving me something with that. So I would say when you're really intentional and again
Mhm.
observe and stay curious about where your attention's going, that's going to be the most important piece. So,
Oh, thank you. I was trying to multitask and it didn't work.
no, it's
So
okay. It's
now
okay.
all of a sudden I hit the wrong thing. I was trying to bring a banner up that would be able, if somebody that didn't know how to get a hold of you, they could also go get a hold of me. But we'll figure that out at a
Yeah.
later date. Yeah. Thank you, Savannah, for being with us. I can't believe that anybody could deliver that much value before 9 o'clock. I mean, this is crazy. So thank you
Thank
so
you.
much for being
Thank you.
being
Thank
on. And we would, as we've talked, we want you back. So our viewers love the concept of mindset. And
you.
you bring a perspective that I haven't heard. And
Mhm.
your analogies simplify things.
Thanks.
Puppy dog, that just there is like that's so clear when it
Mhm.
comes to our mind. It is a puppy dog because it's just like a little puppy going. So,
That it is.
all
Yeah.
right. Thank you, Savannah.
My
Appreciate
pleasure.
it.
Thank you. Bye.
Really appreciate you.